Hi class, welcome to environmental science. We're going to start with chapter 1, which is studying the state of our earth. And it's just an overview chapter of sort of the big topics that we're going to be looking at this year. The chapter opens with a talk about the Neuse River Fishkill. It goes into detail in your text, but essentially in 1991 a billion fish died in the Neuse River, sort of all at once. I mean, that's a lot of fish and that's unexpected. Of course, it caused a bunch of alarm, what was going on, what would kill so many fish in such a short amount of time. Quick studies determined that it was Pfisteria that was the cause of the fish kill. It emits some sort of potent toxin, but they didn't understand where that Pfisteria had come from. Researchers working with the organisms had symptoms. They ended up with rashes and nausea and different things. And what they found out was that it was a complicated problem, as many are in environmental science, because Pfisteria has 24 different life stages. And it has lived peacefully in that stream for years and years and years as a herbivore eating the algae. And then it switched to a carnivore where it ate fish, where it burrowed into the fish and killed them because of added nutrients. They found that the nutrients entered the water from fertilizer runoff from all the different farms and animal facilities along the edge of the river, which caused the bloom of Pfisteria. And the concern led to $40 million loss in seafood sales in just the Chesapeake Bay region, which, North Carolina is south of that. But people panicked all around where this giant fish kill was. It took actually 16 years after that kill to confirm what toxin it was that was emitted by the Pfisteria that caused this. So research can take some time. And the point of this whole story is that it shows us that environmental problems are complex. They incorporate commercial interests. There's scientific study. Media caused a bunch of hysteria along the way. And then there's also scientific inquiry. So it's sort of just an overview of how complicated problems can be. In terms of our definitions, an environment, some of all the conditions surrounding us that influence life, and what we're going to study this year is looking at the interactions between humans and nature. Systems are sets of interacting components that exchange energy or materials, and then ecosystems, it's the living and non-living components of a particular place on Earth. So living and non-living are important in environmental science, whereas in biology you study more of just the living portion. If you look at all the different things that fit into environmental sciences, it takes into account biology, ecology, toxicology, atmospheric sciences, chemistry, earth sciences, which is why we have some prerequisites for taking this course. But it also factors in, we'll be looking at politics and policy, because a lot of this stuff has to go through politics. What's the ethical choice? How is this done legally? What is the law ramifications? How does it fit in economically? And then looking at literature and writing and media as another influence. So there's a lot of complicated pieces that go into environmental science. Two words that you should know are biotic and abiotic. You might have covered them in bio. Biotic is the living part of the earth, the animals and the plants, and the abiotic is the non-living part, the soil, the air, the water. We will be looking at all of those factors. And this environmental studies, we're going to look at environmental science, interactions of human systems, those found in nature with other subjects like environmental policy, economics, literature, ethics, things that I just mentioned. Looking at this picture, it's just looking at human influence on the earth. So you sort of see some pristine land, and then you see how humans have developed that land and what is the impact of that happening. And that's humans altering natural systems. Humans manipulate their environment more than any other species. So when you look at what makes up an organism's environment, you're looking at things that influence life, conditions that surround us, and those living and non-living things. These are other examples of way humans have altered the environment. Environmental scientists monitor natural systems or signs of stress. So we can, ecosystems can provide life-supporting services such as clean water, timber, fisheries, crops. And environmental indicators are another thing that's important. They're things that describe the current state of the environment, things that we can look at to see what is changing or influencing the environment. And then the big push this year will be understanding sustainability. How can we live on this earth in a way that allows us to use its resources without depriving future generations of those resources? How can we live our lifestyle that we're accustomed to and maybe help other people have a better lifestyle than they're accustomed to, but still be sustainable? These are the 5 key global environmental indicators. These are the 5 that we're going to spend time with this year. This chart is in your book, and it talks about the trends and the outlook for the future and the overall impact on environmental quality. And we're going to get into all of these in big detail. But essentially the 5 are, and they're on this next slide here, this is a summary of them, is biologic diversity. So we want to look and see some of the diversity of the plants, animals, the ecosystems. Food production is a big concern. Looking at the average global surface temperature and the carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere. So what are we doing with these greenhouse gases? How is human population going to affect the globe? And then looking also at resource depletion. If we want to look specifically at biological diversity, there's 2 ways we can look at it. We can look at the diversity of life in an environment, or we can look at the genetics of a particular organism. If it has more diversity in its genetics, it'll be likely to adapt to changes quicker and easier. Looking at species diversity, how many different species live in a particular area, and looking at the diversity of different ecosystems. Genetic diversity is looking at genetic variation among individuals in a population. And like I just said before, populations with high genetic diversity can respond to environmental change better than populations with lower genetic diversity. If they're very, very similar, the populations, whatever that is that's causing that stress, that organism will not be able to adapt to it very readily. Species diversity is the number of species in a region or a particular type of habitat. Species are groups of organisms that are distinct from other groups in form and behavior or biochemical properties. Individuals and species can breed and produce fertile offspring. So you guys know what species are from biology. And then, so we're looking at different species to look at species diversity. Do we have different things that can't interbreed with each other that we can count as unique organisms? And this is just a picture showing us a small fraction of an example of the diversity of life on Earth. Everything from mushrooms to pandas to blue spruce to fish to lichen, moth, all sorts of bacteria. All of this contributes to our species diversity. And then ecosystem diversity is the diversity of ecosystems or habitats that exist in a particular region. How many different types of ecosystems do we have in a particular area? Food production is our ability to grow food to nourish the human population, and we've used science and technology to increase the amount of food we can produce in a given area of land. A lot of that comes from the ability to make fertilizer. Fertilizer has greatly increased our ability to yield produce from certain amounts of land, but that comes with a cost as well. Looking at this is the per capita grain production. So per capita means per person grain production in kilograms. So per person in 1950, 250 kilograms of grain were produced to satisfy per person. Now that doesn't mean you eat 250 kilograms of grain, but when you take into account all the grain that the cow eats for the beef that you are going to consume, that all factors in. Notice that that's increased almost by 100 kilograms per person in a rather short period of time. And that seems to be lowering a little bit or stabling off, but that's something that we will discuss this year. Average global surface temperatures and carbon dioxide concentrations. These are our greenhouse gases. They have always been there. They act like a blanket, and in fact, we need them. It's very important that we have these greenhouse gases. It keeps our planet at a good, stable, warm temperature. Anthropogenic is a word which means it's caused by human activities. So things that we're making a change into the environment are anthropogenic changes. And so quick overview, the solar energy comes in. We need those greenhouse gases. What has happened is that we have too many of them now. So we are trapping too much of that solar energy. And we will look at that in detail, but you can see the global temperature over here is increasing rather rapidly. Okay, we will get into that in more detail. Current human population is 6.8 billion, and over 1 million additional people is added to the earth every 5 days. This breaks down to an additional, and this is net gain. This is birth minus deaths. This is 200,000 people are added per day, which is 140 people per minute, which is about 70 million people per year. So looking at all of this, we're adding lots and lots of people at a rate that we can't deal with. And this is just an image of showing just lots of people, dense population. And then we're looking at resource depletion. So as the human population grows, the resources needed necessary for our survival become increasingly depleted. The thing to recognize is some natural resources, our coal, oil, uranium, they're finite. We cannot renew them. They are non-renewable resources and they cannot be reused. Other natural resources we have a finite amount of, like aluminum or copper, but we can recycle them. So we can recycle them and reuse them. So there's a difference between some of our natural resources there. Development, improvement in human well-being through economic advancement. As economies develop, resource consumption also increases. So in developed nations, 87% of developed nations use the resources for autos and trucks, and 45% of the meat and fish, 58% of the total energy, and 84% of the paper. But what you have to keep in mind is those green sections that are using the bulk of the resources account for less than 20% of the population of the globe. So the developing population is 80%, so 20% of the people use a bulk of the resources. Easter Island is the classic example of resource depletion. It's in the South Pacific, and it once was loaded with trees and grass, and humans came and settled there, and they cut down the trees, and they overused the soil, and they overused the water resources. And by the 1870s, all the trees were gone. There was massive erosion. Food production couldn't be produced because of all of the erosion that took place. They essentially altered the landscape of this island so drastically that it was unable to support that civilization, and that civilization collapsed. So we need sustainable practices. We need to be able to use the earth, but we need to be able to use it sustainably. Development that balances current human well-being and economic advancement with resource management and the benefit for future generations. One sustainable choice is using a bike to commute. In order to live sustainably, environmental systems must not be damaged beyond their ability to recover. We need to be able to allow time for them to recover. They need to, renewable resources cannot be used faster than they can be regenerated, and non-renewable resources need to be used sparingly. And if we look at defining human needs, people in developed nations might say that they need electricity. You don't really need electricity. When we define human needs, the basic human needs are air, water, food, and shelter. And so this is a good place to end this part of Chapter 1, and I will continue with a second video that will cover the other half of Chapter 1.